Unwrap a stick of butter and put it on the counter. The paper is waxed, the color is pale gold, the scent is clean. You've been using this brand for years. Your mother used it, your grandmother used it. And somewhere in the last decades, while none of us were paying attention, the butter in that wrapper stopped being what it used to be. The regulations shifted, the ingredient allowances expanded. The industry consolidated, and the brand on the paper, the one you trust, the one you bake with and spread on toast and stir into oatmeal for your children, may now contain natural flavors. Cultures derived from undisclosed sources, emulsifiers, color additives, or trace residues from a dairy supply chain stretch thinner than anyone in the industry wants to admit. Butter is no longer just butter, and the brands hiding the most. From you are the ones you're most likely to have in your refrigerator right now. Tonight we open the wrapper. The Food and Drug Administration's standard of identity for butter requires that the product be made exclusively from milk or cream, with an optional addition of salt and color, and contain at least 80% milk fat. On paper, butter is one of the most tightly defined foods in the regulatory code. In practice, the expansion of what qualifies as a butter product under adjacent categories, European-style butter, cultured butter, whipped butter, butter blends, butter-flavored spreads, and butter substitute products, has created a shelf environment where a consumer scanning the dairy case cannot reliably distinguish between true butter and butter-adjacent formulations without reading every word on every package. The USDA grades butter, but grading is voluntary and most mass-market brands do not display the grade prominently. The World Health Organization has raised broader concerns about the opacity of industrial food labeling, and a 2023 review in the Journal of Dairy Science noted that the proliferation of butter variants has created consumer confusion around fat composition, cultured versus uncultured preparation, and the presence of non-dairy ingredients in products marketed as dairy-derived. Research indicates that supply chain consolidation in the dairy industry has concentrated production of mass-market butter in a small number of facilities, which has implications for traceability, quality control, and the ability of consumers to make informed choices. The first concern begins with the natural flavor loophole. The FDA permits the inclusion of natural flavor on butter labels under certain formulations, particularly in the European style and cultured categories, without requiring disclosure of the source of the flavoring agent. A consumer reading natural flavor on a butter wrapper has no way to know whether the flavor derives from a diacetyl concentrate, a butter extract from a third-party supplier, a fermentation-derived compound, or something else entirely. For a product that should contain only milk and salt, the appearance of a flavor additive should raise immediate questions, and yet the additive is now present in several premium butter brands without most consumers noticing. The second concern is the color additive annatto, which is permitted in butter to enhance the golden hue that consumers associate with quality. Annatto itself is a plant-derived extract, and most people tolerate it without issue, but a small percentage of consumers experience allergic-type sensitivity to annatto. And the inclusion of the additive in butter without prominent disclosure creates a risk for those affected individuals. More broadly, the use of color additives to standardize the appearance of butter across seasons and supply chains masks the natural variation that would otherwise signal differences in feed quality and production methods. The third concern is the origin opacity of the cream itself. Mass-market butter in the United States is produced from cream pulled from thousands of dairies, transported through centralized processing facilities, and homogenized before churning. This industrial scale means the cream in a stick of butter has no meaningful traceability back to a specific farm, a specific region, or a specific feeding regime. The carbon-intensive logistics of the modern dairy supply chain are one concern. The quality implications of cream blended across unknown sources is another. Studies suggest that pasture-raised cream delivers measurably different fatty acid profiles than confinement dairy cream, including higher levels of conjugated linoleic acid and omega-3 fatty acids, and research indicates that these differences may have nutritional implications for consumers over time. The industrial butter on the grocery shelf washes out those distinctions entirely. The fourth concern is the mono and diglyceride question that arises in butter blends and spreadable butter products. Products marketed as spreadable butter or butter with canola oil often include mono and diglycerides as emulsifiers to maintain texture at refrigerator temperatures. These ingredients are generally recognized as safe by the FDA, but they are also byproducts of industrial fat processing, and some research has raised questions about whether they carry trace levels of trans fat that the current labeling framework does not require to be disclosed. For a consumer choosing butter as a clean alternative to margarine, the presence of mono and diglycerides in a butter blend represents a creep back toward the industrial fat processing that consumers were trying to avoid. The fifth concern is the organic and grass-fed label integrity question. Butter marketed as organic or grass-fed commands premium pricing, and most organic and grass-fed butters are genuine. But a subset of products have been the subject of regulatory inquiries around claim verification, supply chain documentation, and the percentage of the cow's diet that was actually pasture-derived. A consumer paying $8 for an organic grass-fed butter expects the claim to be robust, and in most cases it is, but the premium category is large enough that edge cases exist, and the consumer has limited tools to verify the claim independently. The sixth concern is the European-style butter marketing phenomenon. European-style butter is defined by higher milk fat content, typically 82 to 85% versus the American standard 80%, and often by the inclusion of fermentation cultures that develop a tangy flavor. Many American brands now produce European-style butter, and some imported. European butter is genuinely produced in France, Ireland, or Denmark. But a subset of the European-style category is American butter. That has been reformulated to hit the higher fat threshold without any of the traditional European production methods. The label says European style, but the product is American industrial butter with a slightly adjusted fat profile, sold at a premium that implies something more. The seventh concern is the whipped butter and light butter category. Whipped butter is aerated with nitrogen to increase volume and improve spreadability, and while this is not inherently problematic, it means the consumer is paying the same price for less actual butter by weight, and the nitrogen gas processing adds a manufacturing step that true butter enthusiasts avoid. Light butter reduces fat content below the 80% FDA threshold, which means it is not technically butter but a butter-like spread, often incorporating water, emulsifiers, and other ingredients to maintain structure. The butter language on these labels is regulated but easy to miss. The eighth concern, perhaps the most consequential, is the margarine rebrand. Several brands that historically produced margarine have reformulated their core products into butter blends or butter with oil offerings that sit next to true butter in the dairy case. These products contain some dairy content, but are dominated by vegetable oil blends, often canola or soybean, and they benefit from proximity to butter on the shelf to suggest equivalence. The ingredient panels disclose the reality, but the marketing and positioning obscure it, and consumers shopping quickly can mistake these blends for butter. The ninth concern is the growth hormone and antibiotic residue question in conventional dairy supply chains. The FDA has approved the use of recombinant bovine somatotropin in dairy cattle, and while pasteurization eliminates biological concerns, the broader supply chain practices around conventional dairy have been a subject of ongoing consumer inquiry. Butter produced from conventional dairy reflects the aggregate practices of the supply chain, and consumers who have made deliberate choices to avoid certain dairy practices in milk often overlook that butter carries the same supply chain footprint. The 10th concern is the shelf life additive question. While pure butter requires no preservatives and naturally has a long refrigerated life, some butter blend products incorporate preservative chemistry to extend shelf life in distribution. These additives are disclosed but often in small print, and the consumer reading only the front of the package may not realize that their butter blend contains ingredients that true butter would never require. Here is what a protective investigator would tell you to do. First, read the ingredient panel on your butter. True butter should list cream or pasteurized cream and optionally salt, and that is it. Any other ingredient, including natural flavor, annatto, color added, lactic acid culture, without further specification, warrants scrutiny and often a different product choice. Second, prioritize certified grass-fed and pasture-raised butter from transparent producers, ideally those that identify the farms or cooperatives sourcing their cream. These brands are more expensive but deliver a materially different product, and the premium is earned rather than invented. Third, consider buying from a local creamery if one exists in your region. Small-scale butter production is experiencing a resurgence, and the per-pound cost at a local creamery is often competitive with the premium grocery store tire, while the provenance is absolute. Fourth, avoid butter blends, spreadable butters, and light butters for daily use. If you want spreadability, bring a stick of real butter to room temperature before serving, which takes 30 minutes and preserves the integrity of the product. Fifth, learn to identify European imports that are genuinely European. The country of origin is typically clearly marked, and brands with long European heritage deliver a flavor and quality profile consistent with traditional production. Sixth, when baking, use unsalted butter so you can control the salt load in your recipe independently, and prefer brands with the simplest ingredient list possible. Seventh, consider making your own cultured butter from quality heavy cream. The process takes one evening, requires no special equipment, and produces a butter product with total provenance control. It's a small investment of time that reconnects you to the actual food tradition the grocery store has spent decades industrializing away. The butter in your refrigerator is one of the most fundamental foods in the kitchen, present in the majority of recipes, spread on the majority of breakfasts, and relied on by home cooks across generations. The quiet shifts in what qualifies as butter and what is being sold under the butter label have eroded the reliability of the category in ways that most consumers have never been told about. The good news is that real butter still exists, still costs reasonable money, and can still be identified through a 5-second read of the ingredient panel. The bad news is that the brands most likely to be in your refrigerator are the ones most likely to have drifted from the original definition. Open the wrapper, read the panel, choose deliberately. Your kitchen deserves butter that is actually butter, and your family deserves to know what they're spreading on their morning toast.